Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am starting us as close to on time as I can because I've got to be in worship in a little more than an hour, and I want to try and get as much information to you as possible. So welcome everybody here in the room. Welcome everybody here online. Welcome everybody who is watching this after the fact in the recording. I'm so grateful that you're willing to spend some of your time to learn a little bit more about this area and this topic. First of all, I would like to acknowledge that this series of seminars came out of a conversation that John Thomas, as the representative of our I-Peace group, had with the Outreach Committee, because we were asking them to support Hebron International Resources Network. I'll talk a little bit more about that later in this time together. And in that outreach meeting, people said, I don't know anything about Hebron. Why should we support Hebron? So I want to start by just asking, and for those of you online, if you raise your hand, who here has ever heard of Hebron? Okay. So that's a pretty good showing. Yeah. Who here knows anything about Hebron? That's a few people, but many, many less. Who here knows a lot about Hebron? The only other person who knows a lot about Hebron, and she knows a lot more than I do, quite honestly, is Kathy Kern, who is going to be our second of three presenters. And you're going to be going from me, who is nominally versed, to Kathy, who actually lived there for 2+ years. 20. Oh my gosh, I did not realize it was that much. So Kathy, who lived in Hebron for 20 years, and then the following Sunday, so Kathy is presenting next Sunday for our Sunday seminar. I encourage you to be here for that. And then Hamid, I'm going to mispronounce his last name, Kawazme, will be remotely, God willing, and all is able to happen, going to be our presenter from Hebron 2 Sundays from now for the third session. So this was, as I said, sort of a brainchild and a passion of John Thomas, and I am so grateful for his commitment to Palestine and the Palestinian people, and particularly this city and the struggles that it has currently, but has had throughout the centuries. So, you know, what qualifies me to be the person who's talking to you today? You might well ask. Well, I'm sure that people who are here now probably know that I am Reverend Rebecca Segers, the pastor and head of staff here at Third Presbyterian Church, but perhaps some who are watching after the fact are not aware of that. So part of my knowledge, because part of John's vision for this was that we would start out with the biblical Hebron. Where does Hebron show up in the Bible? And that comes from my education as a minister of Word and Sacrament in the Presbyterian Church. Secondly, I have been to the Holy Land twice, once about 15 years ago, once exactly a year ago in November of 2022. And the photos that I am showing you here, as you can see, it was still when the COVID outbreak was having yet another upswing, and so we're all masked, but we were in a glass blowing factory here. Glass has been a primary and well-known industry in Hebron for centuries. And the vase on the right is on my mantelpiece, because I did indeed buy some items while I was there. And as you can see, it is truly beautiful. So what am I going to be talking about today? Well, I'm going to start with Hebron in the Bible, with how does it show up there, and that's going to be probably half, if not a little bit more, of my presentation. Then I'm going to cover 2,000 years of history in probably 5-10 minutes, which means it's going to be really thin, but at least sort of get you to, well, what happened since essentially 167 before the Common Era and a year ago. So we will dash through that, and then we'll talk about Hebron a year ago when I was there, and then Hebron today, particularly in the context of the war in Gaza and how that is affecting people in Palestine. I think our news has sort of localized it to this one tiny little section, but it is affecting the entirety of the Holy Land and the people of the whole country, particularly. Well, I won't even go there. I'll just say it's affecting people and affecting them, as you can well imagine, poorly. So that's my plan. We've got about 40 minutes to do that, and then I'm hoping to leave you 5 or 10 for questions before I race off to robe and worship. So we'll see how well we do. First of all, the first time that Hebron shows up in the Bible is with this verse. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So if you look at this map, you'll see that Jerusalem is in the upper sort of northeastern corner, and Hebron is down at the bottom southwestern corner. You can see where Bethlehem is. Now, to give you a little bit of geographical context, Bethlehem is about 6 miles from Jerusalem, so you can see Hebron is maybe 2 to 3 times that. So it's not very far away. When you look at a map like this, you think, oh, there's a huge distance. It's not. The Holy Land is very small. Places are very close. If you even remember, as we think later, during the times of Jesus, people walked everywhere. So everything was walking distance, even if it took a few days. So, and you would also might see that Mamre is right there, just slightly above Hebron. So what happened at Mamre? Well, Mamre is where Abram has set up his tent, and he is visited by the angels unaware. You remember that story of the 3 people who show up and they say, hey, we're hungry, and Abram, as he is at that point in time, runs out, is all excited, offers hospitality just beyond imagination, after which they tell him that he is going to father a child. He's around 75 years old at this time. His wife Sarai is about 10 years younger. And so I liked this picture. There's a lot of them that you can find, but I liked this picture because Sarai appears old now. She looks more like 90 than 65 today. But I think probably back then 65 did look a bit older than it does now. So Hebron, you may think, oh, I don't know anything about it. I haven't heard of it at all, or not very much. It shows up 77 times in the Bible. So it feels like, wow, if it shows up that much, then I should know a bit more about Hebron. Well, you actually do. You just don't know that you do. You have not located in your own mind these particular stories. So sometimes it's called Mamre, as we saw. The oaks of Mamre are just slightly north of Hebron. Sometimes it's called Hebron. Sometimes it is called Kiriath Arba. And those names show up even up until today. So slightly after he is promised that he will have this child, that his children will outnumber the stars, Abram settles in Hebron. And then, of course, goes about a whole bunch of different journeys and about that are elucidated through 10 more chapters. And eventually, now they are Abraham and Sarah. Sarah dies at Kiriath Arba, which is just slightly outside of the city. And Abraham buries her in a cave in Hebron. This is very important. So just keep it in mind as we continue. So there are a whole bunch of other stories in which Hebron shows up in the Bible as well. Moses, in the book of Numbers, sends out spies into the land of Canaan. And they bring back grapes in Hebron that are so heavy they have to be carried on a pole. So this is, you remember Moses never went into the Holy Land, right? He never went into the land flowing with milk and honey. He brought his people out of Egypt. He ended up on a mountain. He saw it, but he never got to enter it. So this is right before he dies. He sends the spies out to go, is this the land that God is sending us to after those 40 years of wandering? And they come back from Hebron with just these succulent, juicy, heavy grapes. And that was one of the signs that, yes, this is the land. The picture of men carrying grapes on a pole that are too heavy to be just picked up on their own is actually the logo of the Israel Tourism Agency today. So, and notwithstanding the fact that that this is supposedly the promised land, even as the nation of Israel carved out of a land where people already lived in 1948 by colonial countries, sort of the same thing happened back then. There were people in the land when the Israelite people showed up, came out of bondage in Egypt. And so there were 5 kings of the Amorites, and Hebron was one of them that is named in the book of Joshua. So there are these 5 kings. They're Amorite kings. The Amorites own all of this land. Joshua goes in to take over this land that they have been gifted by God in their understanding and in their story. And he destroys Hebron in the book of Joshua, and as well as the others in that time. Hebron also shows up in Judges. You may remember the story of Samson and Delilah, and he was this man who was very strong, and Delilah cut off his hair, and he lost his strength, and then they tied him to the temple. His hair grew, he got strong again, he tore down the temple, and then he carries the doors to Hebron. So there are lots of stories that all are centered in Hebron or around Hebron or going to Hebron. And part of that is because of the cave in which Sarah and then later the other patriarchs and matriarchs of the Bible are supposed to be buried. Meanwhile, continuing on with the story of the Israelite people, you might remember David, this guerrilla king. Now the land has been settled by the 12 tribes, and the 12 tribes have become very disparate. They are not one nation anymore. They are little fiefdoms held by whatever the brother was. There's the kingdom of Benjamin and the kingdom of Judah and all of these separate little kingdoms. And David, the guerrilla warfare king, and his men get out there and begin to gather it together. Saul supposedly is the king over all of it, but he's kind of being unsuccessful. And so God sends David in 2 Samuel to be king in Hebron. Hebron is in the kingdom of Judah, in the land that particular tribe owned, and he actually reigns as king in Judah for 7 years and some months before he is anointed king and moves the capital of Israel to Jerusalem, uniting the 12 tribes again. Several of his children are born in Hebron. You may remember Absalom and Amnon. So Hebron is a big centerpiece of religious and cultic life back in the early ages of biblical times. Later on, in the Apocrypha, Judas Maccabeus fights the descendants of Esau and destroys Hebron. Now, that's in 1 Maccabees, which is a part of the Bible that we do not regard as part of our Bible. It's called the Apocrypha. It comes after the Hebrew Testament and before the Christian Testament, and is included in Catholic scriptures, but not in ours. But it does tell the story, and it is included as well in Hebrew lore, because the story is the one from which we get Hanukkah. So this destruction of Hebron, and the retaking of it is part of the story of Hanukkah. So, why am I telling you all of that? Well, I'm telling you all of that so that you can come to begin to understand sort of how rich this history is here that we don't even know. We didn't even think about it. It's not even part of our knowledge. And in fact, as I told you, that cave where Sarah was buried is also where her husband Abraham and their child, so it's Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and their wives, Sarah and Rebecca and Leah, oddly not Rachel, but Leah, are all supposed to be buried in this cave.
Rachel's in Bethlehem.
Pardon?
Rachel was buried in
Rachel was buried in, thank you, Kathy. Rachel's buried in Bethlehem. So this is where they're all purported to be buried, is in this cave. This cave, as a result, became a really important spot in Judaism and later in Islam, as they look at, these are the patriarchs. It's called the Cave of the Patriarchs, and Herod the Great, Herod, who was not really so great, but one of the things that he was great about was building, right? He did some massive building campaigns, including rebuilding the temple and a whole bunch of other big building projects that were Roman, like the aqueducts and things like that that you see. There is a great wall which surrounds this cave in which these 6 patriarchs and matriarchs, but it's called the Cave of the Patriarchs, are purported to be buried. This is the only fully extant remaining building that Herod built, that was built by Herod the Great, that is still 100% in existence. So it's kind of cool because Herod reigned from, say, 67 before the Common Era to 4 Common Era. So he reigned for many, many years, and in that time built many, many things, and this is the only one that's 100% still standing. So that's pretty cool. And then a few centuries after that, the Emperor Justinian I erected a Christian church over the cave of, it's also known as the Cave of Machpelah, which is the Jewish name for it. So here you're beginning to see a little bit of the tension around whose people are in it. Much like there's tension around the temple and in Jerusalem, there's tension here that you didn't even know existed, right? And yet here it is. So the Christians come along and they're like, oh, we need to build a church here. And so they do. And then in the 7th century, there is a huge Islamic revolution where the followers of Allah and of Muhammad's teaching begin to sort of take the area. And Hebron is one of the last cities to fall to them. But at that point, it becomes very much an Islamic city. And the Rashidun Caliphate converts the Byzantine church into a mosque. So this is what is on the grounds in the walls that Herod the Great built. So now we've got walls built by a Jewish king with a Christian church that has now been converted to a Muslim mosque. So you're beginning to see a little bit of what's going back and forth in this time. It doesn't get better from there. Then the Crusades happen, and the Crusades, the Caliphate's overtaken by a Christian crusader, and he builds this St. Abram church with 6 tombs that are erected atop the cave. Then shortly thereafter, Saladin comes in and retakes it with Jewish assistance, and they build a synagogue. And then Mamluk comes up and builds minarets on the church and forbids Christians and Jews from entering the sanctuary. And then we have the Ottoman Empire come in. And as it expands, they allow a small Jewish community to remain, but it is predominantly a Muslim city at this point in time. So, like I said, 2,000 years, very quick. And the objective is to show you that really they've been fighting over this land for a long time, but it has been predominantly Muslim for a long time. There are Christians there are Jews there, but predominantly Muslim up until this point. In 1929, under the British Mandate, the tensions continue to escalate, and there is what is known as the Hebron Massacre, in which a Muslim kills around 65 Jewish persons and injures many more. This is part of that tension that is happening as more Jews immigrate into the Holy Land area under Theodore Herzl's mandate to go and take the land for a people. How does it go? A land without a people without a land without a people for a people without a land. So that's what they're going to go do, is they're going to go take a land without a people. Clearly, there are already people there. They don't want their land taken for a people without a land. And this is codified by the colonial powers post-World War II. So in 1948, we have the Arab-Israeli War, and Egypt takes control of Hebron at this point in time. And the leadership there is a mayor of Hebron and the other sort of governmental leaders at the time decide that they want to become part of Jordan. So they vote to become part of Jordan, but that does not happen. Although I think at this point in time they do have Jordanian citizenship. So they aren't officially part of Jordan, but they do have Jordanian passports. In 1967, Israel, there's the 6-day war. Nobody expects Israel to win. They do win. They gain a whole bunch of territory, including a bunch of territory in the West Bank. Among that territory, they get Hebron, along with the rest of the West Bank. And at this point, there is a push to build a Jewish community, a settlement, if you will, in this area. They don't get to come into Hebron itself, Hebron proper, but that little land of Kiryat Arba, where you remember Sarah died thousands of years prior, there is a small Jewish settlement that is that begins there. The land on which they actually settle is given to them by the mayor of Hebron at the time. He is deeply invested in allowing there to be peace. He is so committed that he gives up his own land, it's his own farm at Kiryat Arba, and gives it to the Jewish people on which to settle. Shortly after that, there becomes a lot of stress in the governmental community of Hebron, and it's very clear that he's going to be voted out because they aren't happy that he's striving to make peace with the Jewish community, and he is indeed voted out. Today, Hebron is divided into two sections, H1 and H2. In 1994, so this is all happening as a result of what was happening with the Oslo Accords. You may remember the Oslo Accords that happened. So in 1994, there is another massacre in Hebron. This time it is a far-right Jewish radical who actually was an Israeli-American. And he murders or injures upward of 150 people in the mosque. It's called the Il Abrahimi Mosque massacre. And so in 1997, in response to this, they divide up the land. And what you see on the left, on the western side, is entirely Arab and mostly Muslim. And on the right is a section that is a Jewish settlement is in there. It actually is the only city in the West Bank or in Palestine that has a Jewish settlement inside a Muslim city. So there's about, I see varying numbers, anywhere from 500 to 800 Jewish people who live inside this H2 section. They also got half what had been a mosque. And so when you go to the mosque, there's a dividing line, and half of it's a synagogue and half of it's a mosque. And there was a huge outcry, actually relatively recently, because they also on Jewish high holy days don't allow Muslims into the mosque either. So there's a lot of tension around. And this, once again, remember, this is one of the holiest sites in our tradition, because this is where the patriarchs / matriarchs are all buried. So here's the Cave of the Patriarchs. This is that ginormous wall that I just told you about, that that Herod built, that is still 100% there. This is not a photograph I took. We did not come at it at this angle. This is a photograph I found just so you could have a sense of sort of what it looks like inside. So imagine a settlement, a Jewish settlement, basically being plopped down in the middle of a city that is about the size of Rochester. So this is that part of H2 that we're looking at right here. The rest of the photographs are all photos that either I took or someone on my tour took when we were in Hebron last year. Last year when I was in Palestine, there was unrest. We ended up having one of our tours, the cities we were supposed to go to, canceled because of the strife. And we saw probably the most uncomfortable place that we went was to Hebron. So, but we did go to the mosque. This is the angle at which we entered it. As you may have noticed, it looked pretty well fortified. That's because it was. I mean, Herod built this to be well fortified, to protect these tombs. As you came up, I mean, just look at this amazing stonework. It's just incredible to me how exquisitely beautiful this work that has been there for literal thousands of years is. And as we came up into Hebron, into the mosque, we had to go through these very narrow walkways up these stairs. And eventually we came in. We went to the mosque side, not to the Jewish synagogue side, although we could sort of see the other side, which was odd. And I realized as I was preparing these pictures that I didn't take any pictures of that. It didn't occur to me. It felt so wrong. I guess I'm not a journalistic photographer. If I had the sensibilities of a journalistic photographer, I would have gone like, oh, I need to document this. But that did not occur to me. What occurred to me was to document our experience, which was trying to ignore that experience, which feels really human and really like very much of what's been going on for centuries. We're just gonna pretend that doesn't exist there. I think that's a lot of the history of this area. So as we went into the mosque, we had as women to cover ourselves, to have head coverings, and so they had these very attractive garb for us to put on. And there we are entering into the mosque. It is stunning. As you can see, there are these Byzantine decorations. And this is our whole group around one of the cenotaphs. A cenotaph is another word for a memorial, because they're not really sure, probably it's actually unlikely, that Abraham and Sarah and etc. are all actually buried under here. This is nonetheless the holy place where they, I know, it's very shocking. But these memorials are built in their honor, in their memory, and it's regarded as an incredibly holy site as a result. I am sort of in the back, which you can't really see me, but I am there, I promise, in this garb. So This is the cenotaph of Abraham. Once again, though, just look at the incredible stonework. I mean, it's just all so very, very beautiful. And then finally, there is an entry to the cave beneath the mosque. It is in this sort of tall structure, and you can see this odd little locked, sort of almost well cover type of thing. And back in the early days of Israel's history, I believe it might have even been in 1948. No, it was not that early. I'm sorry, I think it was after the 1967 war. I think it was 1968, because it was when Moshe Dayan was prime minister in one of his stretches. He actually, when they won Hebron in the Six-Day War, he decided he wanted to see what was actually down there. So he got one of his ministers of the daughters, who was a skinny 12-year-old, and they opened it up and they sent her down the shaft. And so she sort of looked around, as a 12-year-old might, and did not really see much of anything. She said there is video footage of her talking about it, and she says that she landed and there was like papers and what felt like leaves or things like that underneath her, and she kind of wandered around with a flashlight and saw a few caves and came back and went back up. So she was pretty useless. But at the same time, there, I think, also is what it raises to me is the issue of sanctity. Mm-hmm. And what do we regard as sacred, and how this must have felt to the people of Hebron, to the Muslim community, to have a site sort of breached in this way, and really to no good end. After we saw that, we went down to meet Mr. Buddy Dwight, who was is a person who lives in Hebron, who is an activist there, and he was essentially telling us how challenging life has been, particularly in these last 20, 30 years, that this street that you see here used to be the major marketplace center. It was long, it was vibrant, it was filled with shops and merchandise and activity in life. And when the division was made from H1 into H2, they took it right down this huge, vibrant marketplace and shut it all down. This was known as Shuhada Street. It's still known as Shuhada Street. And no Muslims are allowed to pass a certain point. Only Jewish people are allowed to go past a certain point. So Mr. Dwight showed up, also, much to our uncomfortability, with a photographer. A photographer showed up after a while, which we had not been told we were going to be photographed. And then he began to walk us down toward the Israeli guards, which you see in this picture down here. The Israeli guards were not happy that we were coming toward them. And they, came up. You can see they've got their guns, and they were like, you can't come down here. And Mr. Dwight tried to convince us that we could go down, which we could legally, I suppose, if the Israeli soldiers allowed us to. And then his objective was to kind of follow, I think, and create an incident. But we were, it felt very uncomfortable. You don't think that's what he was trying to do?
Oh, yeah, no, I never use Bodea.
So
he's bad.
So that's good information to have. We were very, very uncomfortable. Very much felt like we were being sort of dragged into the lion's den, used as human shields. He was clearly very angry, very upset by the mistreatment of the Palestinian people. I, along with several others of us, broke off and went down another road to come up. But my point in telling you this story is sort of twofold. One is that it really heightened for me just how dangerous the situation is there, how it is at the you're just under the good graces of what the Israeli police that are there want to do. I mean, they have control. They have the power. All the power and the control is there. As I said, I, with another group, went down one street. The rest of the group came, and then we stood at the bus, very anxious, waiting for them to return, because it really did feel like an incident waiting to happen. It also made me sad, the other point I wanted to raise, it made me sad because we had tried to meet with Hamid, and it had not been able to arrange the opportunity to meet with him, other than he met me at the glass blowing factory. So before we get to that, I just want to show you, this is a sort of a map of Hebron today, and it's probably going to be too challenging to see, but the one thing you can tell is these are all manned checkpoints, unmanned checkpoints, barriers. Imagine a city the size of Rochester, where everywhere you go, you're going to encounter an obstacle. You know, we joke all the time about how 15 minutes to get anywhere, right? That is what it is to live in Rochester. I love that about Rochester. The same size place, and it can take you hours to get anywhere because you just can't get around, particularly if you are a Muslim, because you're always going to be stopped. You're going to be checked. You're going to have your identity, your passport, your papers all with you, and then you still may not be allowed to go where it is that you need to go. So here I am with Hamid. And in front of the glass blowing factory, we did take him some of his favorite things, one of which is coffee, and Rochester mugs, and what a delight this man is. He, as you can see, is the executive director of the Hebron International Resources Network. I know that Kathy knows him much better than I do. I only had the opportunity to meet him for a brief time, but kindness emanates from him. His whole objective is to help his people in ways that are supporting education, that are supporting daily sustenance. We have here at Third Church helped to support the building of a playground in Hebron. So one of the good things about that is that you got a playground up. Doesn't mean that the Army can't come raise it, but there's more bad press for raising a playground than there is for raising an empty lot. So, you know, one of the things that he is strategic in his thinking around what can I do that actually is going to stay, is going to last, and is going to make a lasting difference for my people, particularly for young people. So I'm really excited, and I just really pray that he is able to join us in 2 weeks. I think you'll really enjoy meeting him. The Hebron International Resources Network does a lot of things. One of the other things that we did was in Ramadan of this last year, I think it was in April, we here at Third paid to feed families at, I've got to look at my little thing because I can't, Al Khair, I would have said it right. So Al Khair is a nearby Bedouin community, and so we helped to feed them. All of the food that you see purchased, all those bags and bags and bags, came from a grant from here at Third Church, which also was something that John Thomas was very, very supportive of making happen. So if only we could have met with Hamid instead of meeting with, you said his name is pronounced Badeh?
I'll talk to you later.
But nonetheless, what a joy that would have been, because then we could have been hearing about some of the ways in which we can make a positive difference in what is clearly such a tension-filled situation. So what does this all mean now? And I'm going to expand a little bit out from what's going on in Hebron into what is going on just across the region. As I said at the beginning of this time together, I think those of us who are nice and safe here in the United States of America see what is happening in Israel-Palestine as horrific. It is horrific on all sides, that all children and adults should be treated as part of God's family, as humanity, and be allowed to live in safety and free from fear. But I also think, in my brain at least, I had it localized to that one specific area. So last week, those of us who were on the Mosaic of Peace tour last November had an opportunity to be on a Zoom call with the leaders of our tour while we were over there, with Doug Dix, who is our representative of the Peace USA, who is in the Holy Land, and with some others, and to hear about what it's like on the ground. And Doug lives in Bethlehem, as does, why is his first name not coming to me? Garib is his last name, of Grace Tours, who is our leader, while we were there. And while there is a relative to Gaza level of safety, they're not entirely safe. They do hear rockets launched, and they are, streets are more shut down. But the biggest thing that they mentioned is the fact that tourism is a standstill. And if you think about the industry that keeps Israel-Palestine running, particularly for the Palestinian people, tourism is a huge, huge part of what's going on. You saw those beautiful shelves of glass. That's not going anywhere, and nobody's coming into the shop to buy it. So all of a sudden, people have lost their jobs. People have lost their livelihoods. People have nothing, no way to bring in income, no way to bring in food. I also received, as a result, this last week, a result of that conversation, a letter from the Evangelical Lutheran Church of the Redeemer in Jerusalem. One thing to know about Christianity is that the Lutheran and the Anglican churches, I believe, are the ones that have the most presence in the area. The hospital that was bombed in Gaza was the only Christian hospital in Gaza. I don't remember if it was Anglican or Lutheran.
Anglican. Yeah. The Orthodox have the much larger presence, but the Protestant churches.
Right, thank you. So at any rate, though, that is the hospital that we in the Peace USA support. So we had been funneling money into that hospital, the one that was bombed. So this is a letter from their pastor, Fersen Zumat, and I looked at it trying to go, where do I cut to share this letter to you? And I just can't. So I'm gonna read this letter to you from him. It says, "Dear sisters and brothers in Christ, I greet you from Jerusalem, the holy city of God, where it feels like peace was assassinated. Many of you have sent messages to me asking about our situation in Jerusalem and how we are coping with this terrifying war. I must extend my apologies for my lack of response. To be honest, I've been in shock, attempting to comprehend what is going on. In my previous correspondences to you, I always saw things in a hopeful light. Allow me to confess, brothers and sisters, that I have lost hope. Friends, every night I hug and kiss my kids more than usual. I cannot open my phone without seeing the horrifying images, a mother holding her lifeless child, a child screaming in pain, fathers trapped under rubble, families in Gaza in one room, because if their house is bombarded that night, they will all die together and no one will be left alone. Today, forgive my frankness, we are planning how to die, not how to live. As a pastor, I try my best to talk with my parishioners and help them to see God during this crisis, but I'm struggling to find him myself. Faith is represented by entrusting God with your life and future, but excuse my lack of faith. I don't know if there will be a future for Christians in the Holy Land. War after another, violence followed with violence, and I feel that it is just the beginning. I am afraid that on such a path, no one will have a future in this land. The only description I can use to describe what is happening is another failure of humanity. Since the beginning of this war, almost every member of my congregation, including seniors, has been looking to emigrate to any destination. Before this war, I would tell people that I would never immigrate because I had a great hope that things would get better as time passes. Today, I think about leaving. Friends, I am not being merely pessimistic. I am afraid. I know as pastors and believers, we should have more faith in God, but I have a family and small children who deserve a bright future. Will they have a future here? Regardless of the pain and fear that is overwhelming us in the land that is called holy, I am called to give hope, even though I need it myself. I am called to heal those who are emotionally injured, regardless of my wounds. From 1967 until the 7th of October, I had true hope for a future coexistence, and I worked hard to make it reality. Today, our existence is at risk. Friends, we need you to stand beside us today more than ever. Many members in my congregation are jobless because of the war. Those who still go to work in Jerusalem risk their lives passing through Jewish areas, whose residents are fully armed these days and suspicious of any Arab. My call is to help people who are suffering and need desperate support. The Church of the Redeemer in Jerusalem is the poorest among all the other Lutheran churches in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in the Holy Land. We have nothing to offer. I hate to ask support, and I've never asked you of any help financially, but today I appeal to you to help the congregation in Jerusalem. I have 45 families who lost their jobs due to the war and are left with no source of income. I'd like to assist each family with $500 to help them buy basic food. Friends, I ask you to be God's instrument of hope. And then he leaves the letter with the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi, make us instruments of your peace where there is hatred, let us sow love, etc. Yours in Christ, Reverend Fursan Zumat. And that is just, I'm not reading that as a plea for us to support that church. I'm reading that as a plea for us to consider how do we support the people of Palestine in this desperate time of need. So what can we do to help? We do an annual olive oil sale. I'm going to ask Link to come up in a second and give you more information about that. That is Palestinian olive oil, and there's no doubt in my mind that the better we support that, that money will support those in Palestine. Additionally, when we were talking with the folks this last Tuesday and talking with our tour guide in Bethlehem, he has a lot of contacts with people who do craft work. We're talking about things like olive wood crafts and things like that. And he is willing to put together sort of a product list that we could use to purchase items. Mindy Schaffer of the Penfield Presbyterian Church is working right now with One World Goods to see if we can figure out a way to use them as a distributor, because one of the issues with moving into things that are not food is then we have to figure out how do we do the tax. So we're hoping to be able to figure out a way to support these artisans that are in Palestine. Another way is to donate to the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. You can do that by writing a check directly to them, or you can write a check here and put it in an offering plate. You can just put Israel Palestine, or you can put this number DR 00081/Israel Palestine. As I said, this is the organization that is really on the ground there. They're working through partners that are on the ground. One of the things Presbyterians do really well is partner. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's us that is doing the work, but we're sending money to reputable organizations that are on the ground, doing things like getting medical supplies where they needed. And then we can also give directly to other partners, such as this church here, or I think particularly of HERN, of Hebron International Resources Network. I have a lot of faith and trust in Hamid, in the work that he does. Do you remember, Kathy, when this organization began? I would say it's a decade old at least.
I think maybe a little younger, but I'm not sure.
He sent his, thank you. He sent his annual report last year to us. I mean, it was pages. of making tangible differences in the city. So, and I think one of the things that is so incredibly challenging about Hebron is it is a place that was more challenged than others already because of the tensions between this settlement directly inside the city, as well as just this history of tension over all of the many decades. So that is what I bring to the table today. And yes, questions, comments, discussion.
Well, you didn't mention doing anything politically. Should we be writing to our congressman?
I think it can't hurt to write to your congressman. I'm not so sure how it is going to help. I'm giving who our congresspersons are and who our senators are. We live in a state that is very pro-Israel and has so I think why not? But at the same time, I wouldn't expect it to have a huge impact.
I guarantee you, Joe Morelli will write back. Any letter Joe Morelli sends back to you will mention Hamas thugs on any issue.
He does.
On any issue mentioning anything having to do with Palestinians, he will mention Hamas thugs.
Okay.
I mean, I spoke at a gathering earlier as well to say, you know, Hamas has been running Gaza for decades, or since 2006.
5 or
6, 4. I think they were actually elected in 2004, and in 2006, Benjamin Netanyahu made sure that there would be no elections after that.
Yeah.
So since 15 years, they have been, you know, the elected government, but there has been no alternative. So the people have not been allowed to be self-governing. They have been stuck with Hamas thugs. Whether they wanted them or not. And Netanyahu has even been on the record about it being helpful to him governmentally to have Gaza and the West Bank under differing governance systems, because then they will be weakened by not being able to align themselves. And so it keeps the Palestinian Authority weak, it keeps Hamas weak, and therefore the chance of a two-state solution is less. So, yeah, there's somebody on...
Patricia asked if there's a possibility of getting a copy of the letter that you read.
I'm sure. I can scan it and send it out later this afternoon.
Rebecca, I do know just from my own, people here don't know, but long family connections, that politically writing, though, your opinion is counted. You probably all know this.
Right. And
so with the shift in the greater awareness, I mean, I've been writing pretty much every day to some different organ and getting those letters back. But I know they count, the letters. And I know that we have to think with hope and long term.
And we can ask for a humanitarian pause.
Yeah.
And aid to get
ceasefire. Say ceasefire, because a humanitarian pause is not saying, yeah, no, we're good. I mean, Israel directly wants to drive all Palestinians out of Gaza. That is the plan. And a ceasefire means we've got to stop the war.
And speak about the violations to international law that are occurring.
Yeah, absolutely.
Biden has essentially been condoning genocide.
Yeah.
So we need to, I think we actually really need to press on that level. Yeah. He could really lose the election over this. Yeah. The young people and Muslims and Arabs could really choose not to vote for him because of this.
Well, and all the demonstrations yesterday showed us how the young people are divided and feeling.
Yeah.
And I know that the statistic I heard this week from other sources is that 38% of the young Jewish population now is in argument with the elder population about this. And Tikkun and the major Peace Now Jewish organizations were in those marches yesterday. So you are not being anti-Semitic, and the word Semitic includes Arabs, Jews, Babylonians, and Phoenicians historically. So,
to complain against a governmental
Yeah.
action is not to
Yeah.
complain against the
However,
people.
be sensitive.
Right.
This is
yeah.
Hamas committed a war crime. It's a war crime to target civilians.
Yes.
And what happened on October 7th was atrocious.
Right.
My husband had 2 friends killed and 1 kidnapped on October 7th. And that's, and remember, the 200 hostages are also in Gaza being bombed now. So
It is terrible. And I mean, I have Jewish friends in this community who were just on a trip around the same time I was, about a month after, who stayed in the kibbutz that got leveled by Hamas. And so people that they knew, that they stayed with, that they met with, have either been killed or are now homeless refugees themselves. So absolutely, I think sensitivity is definitely called for, even as we do call for a ceasefire as well.
people's feelings are not as important as Palestinian lives.
There was a fellow who came to this church, Rebecca, before and when this church had a program, named Mahmoud Al-Kurd, and I remain very good friends with him. He was here at RIT as a Fulbright scholar and showed his photographs, and we became friends with him because of our shared concern. His whole family this week in northern Gaza, their house was bombed. He has 6 siblings, a mother and father there, and he's in Canada now. But the top of the house came off. Thank God everybody was in the bottom of the house. And they had not gone to the south where you heard Netanyahu, because they heard that's not safe, and indeed it wasn't. So they survived that. But this was 2 weeks ago when he told me this. And then now they're in the northern region that's being heavily bombed. And as you know, if you all are following, there's no communication possible with people. So he has no idea if they're dead or alive.
So when Israel says it's sending out,
He was here with us.
yeah, when Israel says it's sending out messages on social media that everyone has to meet, there's no electricity, there's
No water.
people can't read their social media.
So I'm mindful that worship begins in 18 minutes, and I need to leave in 3. So what I would love to do to close us is to actually read this St. Francis prayer as our closing prayer. And thank you all for coming, and really encourage you to come next week to hear about Kathy's 20 years of experience in Hebron, and the following week, in which we assuredly hope that Hamid is able to lead us then. So let us pray. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.